Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Shalom AZ Ministries, House of New Beginnings. If you're joining us for the first time, we'd love to connect. Just drop a note in the chat and tell us where you're watching from. When we gather together each day and each week, our heart's desire is to truly encounter the presence of the King of the universe, not simply for our own emotional experience or to check off some kind of religious to-do list. Our desire is to meet with Him and to be transformed into the likeness of His character in ever-increasing measure. We want to be like Him and to be transformed so that we can be transformative in the places where He has planted us, that we would be water bottles in the desert, overflowing with the life and refreshing newness that He is pouring into us. Today, as we gather in Yeshua's name, let's remember He's here with us. He sees you, He knows you, and He's working in your life to shape you into His likeness so you can radiate His love wherever you are. In addition to joining us for Daily Manna each day at 10 a.m., we hope you're able to join us for Shabbat service on Saturday at 10:30 Arizona time. Our Torah portion this week is Numbers 30, verse 2 through Numbers 32, verse 42. Our Haftarah portion is Jeremiah 1, verse 1 through Jeremiah 2, verse 3. Our New Covenant reading is Matthew 5, verses 33 through 37. Please download our Shalom AZ app on your phone or streaming device. It's the easiest way to watch services, access devotionals, and share teachings with friends. Just search Shalom AZ in your app store. We want to say thank you to everyone who gives so faithfully. Your generosity is an act of worship to the Lord, and it makes it possible for us to share Yeshua and the richness of His Word with our community and beyond. We couldn't do this without you. As you give, you're not only meeting needs, you're partnering with the Lord to bring life and transformation to countless hearts. We are grateful that as you give to Him, you are entrusting Shalom AZ Ministries to be the faithful stewards of your worship and giving. The easiest way to give is through our app or online at shalomaz.com/give. You can also mail a check to our P.O. Box. As we dive into the Word today, we want to remind you that each Daily Manna teaching comes with a companion devotional guide. This guide is designed to help you go deeper beyond the live stream, whether in your own personal devotion time or as a resource to help you in ministering to others. You can use it in so many ways, for daily reflection and journaling, as a family devotional around the dinner table, or even to start a simple Bible study during your lunch break with coworkers you're ministering to. No matter how you use it, these devotionals are meant to help you not just hear the Word, but to live it out and share it with others. If the Holy Spirit has put someone on your heart, a neighbor, a friend, a relative, this can be an easy way to invite them into a conversation about Yeshua in a natural, approachable way. You can download today's companion devotional right from our app or our website at shalomaz.com. Thanks for being here. Let's let Yeshua have His way in us today.
We are continuing in 1 Peter, and we're in 1 Peter chapter 4 this morning. Let me go to it. There we go. And I want to just kind of, I think it's, just give us a brief recap again. I know we recap a lot, but, to recognize that Peter he's writing to believers who are suffering and probably discouraged in the length of their suffering and the loss that they're dealing with. I mean, there's a toll that it takes when you are hurting. I mean, anyone who's gone through, and I can't say that I understand, that I identify with this personally, in my own experience, but the toll that pain takes on a person, the toll, that the psychological toll, the toll on your thoughts that it takes, the weariness that comes through prolonged struggle is real. It's a genuine battle, and where you begin to, where the struggle is won and lost is in your thinking, in the way that you begin to view and approach things. It begins to wear at your perspective. It begins to wear at your attitude. And so even when you think about when there are people who inflict suffering intentionally, their goal is to break someone. The goal is to break you and to cause you to collapse and give up. And what the Lord wants is for us to endure. And so Peter is writing to say, endure, and rather than it breaking you, let it produce in you something good, something beautiful, something redemptive. So that you look at you think about unjust suffering, stories of unjust suffering. One of the first people that would come to mind would be Joseph. When you look at the story of Joseph, when you look at what Joseph had to endure, and he suffered unjustly. People want to point to his youthful, him not using wisdom in sharing his dreams, but he didn't make up his dreams. He was given his dreams, and he shared his dreams. And there was jealousy, and there were things that, again, he didn't conjure those dreams up. He's just sharing what's been revealed to him, and there were things that, so people want to blame him, but the fact is, it's not. He was thrown away by his brothers unjustly. He was sold into slavery unjustly. He responded to temptation in Potiphar's house with righteousness, and because of his righteousness, he ended up in Pharaoh's prison. Because of his righteousness, he endured more suffering, and he comes through all of that, and in all of it, he continues to be faithful to the Lord. When he's in prison, and again, he doesn't know the end of the story. He doesn't know if the dreams that he had as a young man are true, but he's enduring suffering. And what you see in the fruitfulness of his suffering is God was using all of it to produce in him something, to produce in him a character that would be able to be in the place that God had for him. When he was in second in command, he was now not the immature kid that he was when he was pronouncing his dreams. And so now God had used all of this for good. That what the suffering that was intended to break him, that was intended to destroy him, that which the enemy intended for evil, he came to understand God used it for good. And so while the suffering that we face isn't from God, God doesn't necessarily remove us from it. He doesn't necessarily remove it from us. And so when it's ongoing, when it comes and it cascades, and it goes from being thrown into a pit, and that betrayal by your brothers, from a pit and then into a prison, and in the face of righteousness, or because of your righteousness, that has the potential to cause you to say, forget it, God has abandoned me. But to endure and to press through to the other side so that God can now use you. It's not just for you, but he wants to use that suffering to produce something in you that will be a blessing. So that in the midst of the famine, there was an opportunity for life. And there's a picture of what God is wanting to do. And so, but there has to be an endurance, and you have to keep your eyes fixed on the Lord. And so Peter is writing to them because in the midst of suffering, it feels like I'm not It doesn't feel like this is victory. How can I'm losing everything? I've been ripped away from the people have been ripped away and from their homes, and they're in exile. And so Peter is in exile, writing to other exiles. They're experiencing an injustice over and over again, and they're being insulted. They're being torn down. They're on the edges of society. They're on the margins of society. They're not being treated with, they're being insulted and they're being slandered. They're being lied about. They're rejected by other Jews who aren't believers. They're rejected by the locals who don't want them there in the first place. And then those who are believers that are household slaves, now they're in the midst of that situation. They're called to represent Yeshua in the midst of that. For wives who are in homes in which the husband is not a believer, they're instructed about how they can live so that husband, so that family might be gained. And so he's writing to people who are fed up. Everything in them wants to fight back. Everything, your normal fleshly response to injustice, wants to lash out, wants to stand up and say, enough, I can't handle it anymore. And so what the Lord is doing, what the Holy Spirit is doing to his people, speaking to his people through Peter, is to refix our minds, to reorient them. And so to focus on our mindset. And so in 1 Peter 1, he said in verse 5, says, you who are being garrisoned, God is bringing you through by God's power through faith into a salvation that's ready to be revealed in the last time. Not yet revealed, it's ready to be revealed. In this you greatly rejoice, just for a little while. So there's this, your suffering is momentary. It feels long. I mean, for Joseph, it was a lifetime. It was a lifetime. It was the prime of his life. For just a little while, in the present, if it's necessary, you have been pained by various trials. There's a purpose. It's in order that the true metal of your faith, which is far more valuable than gold that perishes through the fire of the refining of the metal testing process, that your purified faith may be found in praise and glory and honor at the unveiling and revelation of Messiah Yeshua, who you've not seen, but you love him. In the now, in the present moment, you may not see him, but you trust him, and you rejoice with a joy that's inexpressible and glorious, obtaining the goal, the perfection, the goal of your faith, which is the salvation, the deliverance of your souls. He says, and then he says, don't go back to your previous mindset. Don't go back to the way that you once thought to. And he begins to remind them who you are. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget who you're following. He is the living stone, the cornerstone that was rejected, and you are living stones, and God's building a house. And 1 Peter 2:9 says you're a chosen race, the word is genus, when you study in science, different kinds, there's a genus. You're a different kind. You're a kind, a genus that's been chosen, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation, a people preserved, so that you will proclaim the excellency of the one who out of darkness called you into the marvel of his light. So that you're going through this, you're a different kind, and you're called to proclaim. He said you were called into this. It's to this that you were invited. It's into this that you were called. Verse 21 of chapter 2, into this indeed you were called, since Messiah also suffered greatly for you, leaving behind a pattern for you, so that you will follow after his footsteps. Look at him. When you start to feel like I can't do this anymore, when you start to feel like don't be fixed and focused on the moment. Don't be a prisoner of the moment, but fix your eyes on him. Fix your eyes on him, who, verse 23, who when he was insulted, when he was abused, he didn't return the insults and the abuse. When suffering, he didn't threaten. Instead, he handed it over to the one who judges righteously. In the next chapter we looked at, in 1 Peter 3, verse 9, he says, don't give back, don't return injury for injury or verbal abuse for verbal abuse. Do the opposite. Give a good word, give a blessing, because to this you were called. This is what you were invited to. This is the deal. Keep your eyes fixed. This is just for a little time. Keep your eyes fixed on him, on the hope. There's a hope that's going to, beyond this present moment, there's an assurance to get through this. This is producing, this pain is going to end, and it will produce something in you. So don't stop now. He says, even if you suffer, verse 14, because of righteousness, if you suffer because of your righteousness, you're blessed. Don't be afraid. Don't be unsettled by a fear of those sufferings. Instead, consecrate Messiah as master in your heart. Let him be what rules your heart. Don't let your heart get weary. Don't let your heart get discouraged. Let him be the one who rules your hearts, always eternally ready that you're going to be able to give an answer in the face of to anyone who demands from you a reason, a word surrounding the hope that is in you. That in the midst of, when you're giving back a blessing in the face of cursing, when there's something different in you that is recognizable, that in the midst of the squeezing, that what comes out of you is not anger and vitriol and hatred, but what comes out of you is a love that is joy unspeakable, that's inexpressible, is full of glory. In the midst of that, when that's what comes out of you, that they will say, how can this be? I demand you tell me, how can you be like this in the face of what you're going through? Be ready in that moment. Be ready to give an answer for the hope. Keep your eyes fixed on the hope that is in you. Again, continually pointing to Yeshua, since verse 18 said, since also Messiah suffered once, or completely, definitively, concerning our sins. He suffered, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He suffered to bring you to God. There was purpose. For Hebrews 12 says, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, and then calls us to fix your eyes on Yeshua, the one who started it, the author and the finisher of your faith. Fix your eyes. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood, is what the writer of Hebrews says in Hebrews chapter 12. Fix your eyes on him. He was put to death in the flesh here, on the one hand, and on the other, he was made alive by the Spirit. And then verse 22 points out, he endured suffering, and it was, again, just for a little while. And now he is, verse 22 says, he is at the right hand of God, having gone into the heavens. Angels and authorities and powers are subjected to him. This will pass. Endure. And don't just endure, but stand. And so he says here, therefore, verse 1 of chapter 4, therefore, since Messiah suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with this same attitude. For the one who has suffered in the flesh is finished with sin. Since Messiah suffered in the flesh, here's the thing. He says, resist, hold away from you your desire to fight back. Your defense is not going to be of yourself. Your defense is not going to be, you're not to stand up and fight for yourselves. Your defense is going to be for the hope that is in you. And if you're saying, well, how do I arm myself? Look, they're attacking us. They're hurting us. Excuse me. What do we arm ourselves with? He says, arm yourselves with this. Take up as a weapon, and the language that's used here is take up as a weapon this mindset. This nous is the Greek word. Take up this understanding, this attitude. Since Messiah also suffered, take on his mindset, his attitude. Again, like Hebrews says, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. And Peter understands this change of mindset. We know this story in Luke 29 or 22. There's no Luke 29. In Luke 29, verse 49, it's 22. Sorry, verse 49. It says, when those around him saw what was going to happen, they said to him, Master, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Yeshua answered and said, stop this now. And he touched the man's ear and healed him. And we find out in John 18 who that was. John 18 verse 10 says, then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. Now the servant's name was Malchus. So Yeshua said to Peter, put the sword into the sheath. The cup the Father has given me, shall I never drink it? Peter remembers that. He remembers that when they went to walk in Luke chapter 9, when they go into Samaria, and that John and James, John and Jacob say, hey, shall we call down fire from heaven? And Yeshua rebuked them and said, you don't know of what spirit you are when you say that. That is not of the Spirit of God. That is of the mindset of this world. In Matthew chapter 16, when Yeshua tells Peter, look, I'm going to suffer. I'm going to be taken, I'm going to suffer, and I'm going to go through all of this. And Peter says, we can never let that happen. And Yeshua says, get behind me, Satan, for you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of this world. That the difference in the mindset, in the understanding of the things of this world versus the things of God. The mindset of Yeshua was one that laid his life down, laid his rights down, didn't defend himself, but he loved to the last. He loved to the very last moment, that he won. Colossians says he made a spectacle of the powers of this world, overcoming them by the cross. That the world says that the mindset of this world is to take and to grasp and to destroy in order to win. And he lived a life fully, selflessly laying his life down all the way to the very end, never once having lived selfishly, culminating in the most selfless act of all, suffering to such a degree, to like the worst that humanity could do, he took upon himself so that we might have life. It says, now, how do we arm ourselves? We have the right to bear arms. Yeah, arm yourself with this attitude, this mindset, which is in Messiah Yeshua. And he says, for the one who has suffered in the flesh is finished with sin. What's Peter saying there? I mean, when Peter talks about sin, in Peter's epistles, sin is indicating concrete acts of sin. He's not talking about sin in the way that Paul does, where Paul talks about the power of sin over people, where Paul's talking about the inclination towards sin. He's talking about concrete acts of sin. And he says, look, when you're at a place where you're ready to lay down, you're ready to suffer, you're willing to endure the physical and emotional pain for the love of another, you're willing to lay down your rights and to endure suffering and pain for the love of your enemies. Well, then your temptation is not going to be toward all this other junk. I mean, and look, you do see that practically speaking. You know, the temptations to compromise with the things of this world, they really are something that are faced mostly by believers who are in places of comfort. Right? When in the United States, we're not a persecuted believing community. And so there are all of these other temptations that believers here face. The believers that are dying for their faith around the world. Persecuted believers, they've already had to die to that stuff. They're ready to literally die for the love of the Lord that they have not yet seen, as they hold on to the hope. When you look at, again, the 7 congregations in the letters in the letters in Revelation, the 2 of them that are persecuted, the congregation at Smyrna and the congregation at Philadelphia, there's no corrective word for them. Right? There's no corrective word there. They're persecuted, and that has had a purifying effect. Saying, look, this is a concrete impact of suffering. That, you talk about the hierarchy. In psychology, we learned about the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when you're ready to lay down your very basic needs, right, then the other things are not necessarily temptations. When your safety and your security, when your physical well-being is being impacted, that's where your greatest need is. And when you can face that with the mindset of Messiah Yeshua, when you can lay that down and you die to that, then this other stuff isn't really a temptation. You would have given in a long time to these other things if you were going to give in. So he says, verse 2, as a result, let me read that. For the one who has suffered in the flesh is finished with sin, into which no longer, and as a result, he lives the rest of his time in the flesh, no longer for human desires, but for God's will, but for what God desires. You're not living your life then for the cravings for human, and that he uses for human desires, it's epithumia, the cravings of your flesh, for the lusts of your flesh, for what your body hungers or desires. The person who is facing suffering, who endures suffering, isn't living his life for that stuff anymore. He's living his life saying, your will be done. Just like, so Yeshua, right the night before, he said, he was sweating as though it were drops of blood. So whether he was actually sweating drops of blood or as though it were drops of blood, he was stressed. He was facing something that he had his own human anxieties about. And he said, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not my desire, not my will, not my craving. Right now, I crave to avoid this in this moment in his humanity. He says, but not my desire, but yours be done. Your will. The person who lays his life down, who sets his mind with the mind of Yeshua, who takes up as his weapon the mindset of Yeshua, no longer lives for his own cravings and desires, but now lives for what God desires. And so we can live that out more so in our lives in the most simple ways. I make this kind of example a lot, but to just move things into the really mundane practicalities of daily living in our own homes. We'll say, husbands will say that, I'd take a bullet for my wife. And yet, we often won't lay down our right to win an argument. We won't lay down our right and love her as Yeshua loved his people and gave himself for them. We always have to defend ourselves and win the argument, rather than loving with a selfless love. Rather than seeking to understand, like what Peter says here in the previous chapter, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. Rather than seeking to understand. There's the theoretical idea of laying down our lives, and there's the practical. And we don't necessarily suffer physically but we're like when my kids are all fighting, it's because no one's willing to put the other first. It's because everybody's looking to get their way, to get what they crave in that moment, whatever it is, my way. And on the smallest things, unwilling to lose this battle. But hold on just a second. Unwilling to face, but that's not fair. Unwilling to face a moment of injustice for the love of another. Of a sense of injustice. No, I have to fight this one out. And everything within us rises up. And he says, look, no, what is it that God desires? What does he desire to produce in me? What does he desire to produce in my home, in my family? What does he desire to produce in this relationship? In my workplace? What does it mean to walk as he walked? To endure insults and return a blessing that overflows in reality? What kind of impact will that have? Am I willing to do that? Am I willing to do that in a like not just once or twice, because after a while it begins to wear down on you. So he says, so gird up the loins of your mind. Prepare yourselves. Be sober. Be self-controlled, he says. Strengthen the loins of your mind, he said in 1 Peter 1. As a result, he lives the rest of his time in the flesh no longer for human desires, but for God's will. For the time is past that was sufficient for you to carry out, verse 3, the desire of the pagans, living in indecency, lusts, drunken binges, orgies, wild parties, lawless idolatries. So the different words here that are used, he's like, look, you had plenty of time to do all that. That's over. And there's a level, kind of almost like a sarcasm here that, he's like, you've had plenty of time for this. That's over. And the things that are listed here, really they have to do with, the first word he uses is often in old school, like in King James was translated as licentiousness, which is license, right? It's just unrestraint. A lack of restraint in all kinds of areas. So a lack of restraint in whatever your cravings are. So whether those cravings be sensual, whether those cravings be having to do with food and drink, this overindulgence, this or sexual, or in terms of feeding rage. Licentiousness can have to do with just rage, just no restraint, no self-control. Just exploding in anger. Those things are the works of the flesh that kind of lack of restraint. That's the stuff that Paul lists in Galatians chapter 5. And so the first one is, acts of abandon, and then he talks of epithumeus, those lusts, those cravings. Then the three terms that have to do with, like, one is kind of there's overflow of wine is oinoflugais, and then komois is excessive feasting. It says carousing sometimes, but it's just gluttony, just feeding your flesh, literally. Feeding your cravings, not having any self-control. The impact of that affects the way we treat other people, because look, I've shared this before, but I remember years ago I had to travel a lot when the boys were little, and I would be speaking in a different place every week, and I'd go and I'd speak, and then I'd be in a hotel, and I'd read, and I'd have all this time to myself, quiet, or I'd be in the car, I'd be listening to talk radio, sports radio, listening to worship, just lots of time to myself. And then I'd get home, and my wife had all these, we had, whether it was 3 or 4 or 5 kids, and they were little, and I'd get home and I wouldn't have any patience for them because I'd had all this me time. I was accustomed to the quiet. I was accustomed to doing what I wanted, when I wanted, how I wanted. And now I'd get home and she'd say to me, "I don't understand. You had all this time to yourself. I'd kill for that kind of time." And you would think that you would be like rejuvenated, refreshed, and you'd have more patience, but you have less. Why is that? The more I thought about it, it's like the more of what you feed, the more you crave it. It doesn't actually satisfy. The more you feed your flesh, the more you want to feed your flesh, the more you crave. And the more you die to your flesh, the more you lay it down, the less you hunger for that. And that's why, for instance, that's why fasting is such a spiritual exercise. That fasting, laying down, learning to die to what I physically crave, begins to set me in a position to now focus on what really matters. So fasting and prayer and that focusing not on what I crave, but now setting my mind to understand what he craves. So the prayer of saying, your will, what is it you desire? What is it you crave? There's that connection. The more of whatever you feed, that's more of what you're hungry for. And so what you see here is you had time to do that. You fed and fed and fed and fed, and it never satisfied. And then the last thing he mentions speaks to lawlessness and idolatry. Just idolatry that is forbidden, and it's lawless, and it goes against basically everything. He says you had time for that stuff. And this is the stuff that characterized Roman society, right? It's the stuff that they didn't understand what the deal was with believers, whether it was, and with Jews in general too. The Jews in general didn't partake generally in these things. But it says here in verse 4, it says, they're surprised. They think it's strange. The word here is xenos, like it's alien, it's foreign. It's an outsider thing. They think it's foreign, it's weird that you don't run with them into the same riot of recklessness. And they vilify you. They blaspheme you. They slander you, is what it says. It uses the word blasphemy. They vilify you because you don't engage in this stuff with them. But verse 5, they will have to give an account to the one who stands ready to judge the living and the dead. No one's going to escape judgment. Every one of us is going to have, and so here now is this focus on eternity. They're going to have to give an account. And the implication is we all have to give an account. He judges the living and the dead. He judges us as we live, and those who once lived will have to face the judgment. And so the question is, again, it comes back to when you kind of track back from even early in chapter 1, where he's saying, look, you're going through this for just a little time. And it's all bringing it to a perspective of we're all going to have to stand before the one who judges the living and the dead. So live your life with that in mind, and love them with that in mind. Endure the suffering so that some of them may be won, so that you're ready to give an account for the hope that is in you, because they will have to stand before the one who judges them. And we don't want to be like Jonah, who's sitting on a waiting, desiring for the judgment of God to come. And the Lord rebuked him for that. You'll remember at the end of Jonah chapter 4. The Lord rebukes him and says, you're more concerned about your comfort. You're more concerned about the weed growing up over your head that you didn't have anything to do with than you are about the more than 100,000 souls and even the animals that are there that are going to face the judgment. All you care about is your own comfort. And he's rebuked by the Lord for that. So we don't want to be identified with that. We want to recognize that the living and the dead will stand before God for judgment. So they're going to have to give an account for how they slander you, So again, going back to make sure that when they slander you, that they don't have something to actually pin that to. We are living above reproach before them. And he continues in verse 6, for this was the reason the good news was proclaimed, even to those now dead. So this is not about preaching to the dead. It was proclaimed to those that are now dead in the flesh before humans, they might live in the spirit before God. Death, there was this idea, so for Romans and for unbelievers, they were like, what's the deal? You guys live your life yourselves, and then you die just like the rest of us, and you didn't get to enjoy any of that, so what was the point? And so this basically says, no, the good news is proclaimed, and it was, even though you died, even though people that received the good news, it was proclaimed to them, they're now dead, understand that they stand before the judge. That's why the good news was proclaimed to them, because we all have to stand before him. We all have to stand before him. So you have to keep that in mind. You have to keep that in perspective, that we will answer to the Lord. And so that's why God in his mercy reaches to us. That's why good news is proclaimed to us. That's why Yeshua proclaimed good news to those captive in prison. He suffered in order to proclaim good news to those in prison. And that's what our suffering is, with a purpose. It's so that they might know. So that all might come to know him. That's what's to drive us, is love. So that, because they are, though they are judged in the flesh before humans, even if you face death, being judged before humanity to die, the hope is that they might live. So there's, again, that I talked about yesterday, men day, that on the one hand, on the other hand, that language is used here again, where they would die, judged in the flesh on the one hand before humans, that they might on the other hand live before God, in the spirit, in the Ruach before God. That is what drives us. That all might come to know him, that they might live. Amen? Well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much for joining us for Daily Manna today. May the work that the Holy Spirit has stirred in your heart today overflow from you to the lives of those you encounter. May Yeshua's love bubble forth from you to your family and your friends and your co-workers, even and especially the people who might be unkind to you. Let's be life-giving water bottles in the land that is dry and weary, where there has been no water. Please don't forget to download our Shalom AZ app on your phone or streaming device. It's the easiest way to watch services, access devotionals, and share teachings with friends and family. Just search Shalom AZ in your app store. And again, if you've been blessed by Shalom AZ Ministries but haven't yet taken that step to give, would you prayerfully consider sowing into what God is doing here? Your giving is instrumental, helping us live stream services, create devotionals, and reach people who are hungry for truth and hope. As you give, you're not only meeting needs, you are partnering with the Lord to give life and transformation to countless hearts. We're grateful that as you give to him, you're entrusting Shalom AZ Ministries to be faithful stewards of your worship and giving. Again, the easiest way to give is through our app or online at shalomaz.com/give. You can also mail a check to our P.O. Box. And remember, please join us for Daily Manna, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Arizona time. If you can't join us live, that's okay. The food is still hot and ready for you. Together, let's be built on the richness of God's Word at work in our lives by the power of his Spirit. Thanks again for being here. Let's let Yeshua have his way in us as we go forward to serve him wholeheartedly. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.